Sophie Carter walked down the polished halls of Ashwood High, her dark skin standing out against the sea of white uniforms, her shoes worn and slightly scuffed from long days spent helping her father, the school janitor. Every glance from students and teachers seemed to carry a silent question: what could a girl like her possibly achieve here? She kept her head low, clinging to her violin case, a fragile, patched-up instrument that had been her only companion for years. It wasn't much, a scratched wooden body held together by tape, strings that had frayed with time, but to Sophie, it was priceless. Sophie's father, James Carter, had been working as the janitor at Ashwood for nearly a decade. A kind, quiet man, he had taught Sophie the value of patience, humility, and hard work. After school, while most students rushed home, Sophie lingered, helping her father polish floors and tidy classrooms. In these quiet moments, she allowed herself to dream. She would sit alone in the empty music room, the fading light catching on the violin, and play melodies she had memorized from old recordings. The notes, though imperfect at first, carried the warmth of her heart and the whispers of her dreams. But the world outside that music room was unkind. Teachers dismissed her quietly, classmates whispered cruel comments, and laughter followed her like a shadow. "That girl? She can't even hold the violin right," some would sneer. Others whispered about her father as if his job defined Sophie's worth. She overheard the snide remarks from wealthy girls while passing the restroom. A janitor's daughter, playing violin? Maybe she should just sweep floors like her dad. Sophie's throat tightened, her chest aching with shame and anger. She gripped the violin tightly, swallowing tears she refused to let anyone see. She had learned long ago that her strength would remain private until it was too time to reveal itself. Music was her sanctuary. Alone in the dim music room, Sophie drew her bow across the strings, coaxing trembling notes into the empty air. Each sound was a rebellion against the mocking laughter, a quiet affirmation that she belonged in this world just as much as anyone else. As the melodies flowed, she imagined herself on stage, playing in front of audiences who couldn't doubt her talent, who couldn't see her family's circumstances as a barrier to her dreams. Every note was a promise to herself. One day, she would show them all. Opportunity arrived unexpectedly and cruelly. The school announced its annual talent show, an event that had always been a stage for students with privilege and polished instruments. Teachers whispered about who would perform, joking in the hallways, unaware of the girl they thought was beneath notice. "Why not have Sophie play?" one teacher joked behind closed doors, her tone dripping with sarcasm. She could use some public humiliation. Sophie's heart sank when she overheard the suggestion, but she did not retreat. She had spent too long hiding in shadows to let fear dictate her path. The night of the talent show, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Parents and students filled the rows, chatting excitedly about the flashy performances to come. Sophie sat backstage, the worn violin cradled in her hands. Her stomach knotted with nerves, but she remembered her father's words. "It's not about what they think of you. It's about what you know you can do." Her hands, though trembling, were steady in her resolve. Tonight, the joke would begin, but the ending would belong to her. When the call came for her to perform, Sophie walked to the center of the stage. The laughter started quietly at first, whispers from students who expected a disaster, glances from teachers who assumed the worst. But as soon as Sophie drew the bow across the strings, the room froze. The first note lingered, pure and resonant, silencing every mocking voice. One by one, mouths opened in disbelief, eyes widening. As the impossible unfolded, the music filled the auditorium, not just notes, but emotion, skill, and undeniable genius. Every hesitation, every sneer evaporated in the wake of her talent. In those few moments, Sophie transformed from the girl they had underestimated to the force they could not ignore. The audience sat in stunned silence, captivated by the music and the courage behind it. Teachers who had once joked about her, whispering cruel words, now found themselves caught in the power of her performance. The girl with the worn-out shoes, the taped-up violin, and a janitor father was no longer a subject of ridicule. She was a revelation. As the final note hung in the air, a long pause followed before the hall erupted into applause. Sophie lowered her violin, eyes shining, cheeks flushed with a mix of relief and triumph. She had done more than play music. She had claimed respect not just for herself but for every person who had ever been judged unfairly. And in that instant, Sophie knew her life had changed forever. Ending line for part 1. Sophie stepped off the stage, her heart pounding, ready to face a world that had just realized they had misjudged her. But little did she know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would astonish everyone who had doubted her. The next morning, Ashwood High buzzed with whispers that carried Sophie's name like a rumor too powerful to ignore. The auditorium's applause still echoed in her mind as she walked through the halls. Some students looked at her with newfound respect, others with thinly veiled envy, and a few, still bitter from the embarrassment of the previous night, stared with disbelief. Sophie's steps were careful, measured, but inside her heart raced with the knowledge that her life had changed. For the first time, she was not just the janitor's daughter, they were starting to see her as herself. Yet Sophie knew that respect was fragile. She had made a statement, yes, but the world she moved in was full of challenges, and the whispers of doubt were relentless. In music class, Miss Harper approached her with a careful smile, a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. "Sophie, your performance last night, it was remarkable," she said, her voice softer than usual. I'd like you to join the school orchestra officially. There's a new program starting, and I believe you could play a leading part. Sophie's heart leapt. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, but part of her wondered if the invitation carried hidden expectations or a subtle test. Joining the orchestra was not simple. Sophie was given a list of advanced pieces to practice, pieces she had never played in full before. Some students snickered behind her back, questioning whether the girl with the taped violin could handle the rigor. She ignored them, but the doubt lingered, gnawing at her confidence. Every afternoon after school, while the other students went home, Sophie stayed behind, practicing relentlessly in the quiet music room. Her father watched from the doorway, a proud smile hidden behind tired eyes. "Remember, Sophie," he said one evening, "it's not about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you belong." Weeks passed, and Sophie's reputation grew. She was invited to play solo pieces during smaller recitals, each performance more polished than the last. Her technique improved, her confidence soared, and the old violin began to sound as though it belonged on a professional stage. But with recognition came jealousy. A group of students, led by Claire West, the wealthiest girl in school, started plotting subtle ways to undermine her. They mocked her in hallways, whispered about her father, and even tampered slightly with her music sheets before class. Sophie noticed, but she did not respond with anger. Instead, she focused on mastering her craft, letting the music speak for her in ways words never could. One day, the school announced a regional music competition open to students across the district. The prize was substantial, a scholarship to a prestigious conservatory and recognition that could launch a musical career. Claire and her friends smirked when Sophie's name appeared among the registered participants. "Do you really think she can compete with students who have proper instruments, trained tutors, and perfect attendance?" one whispered. Sophie heard them, her jaw tightening. This was the moment she had been preparing for, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to herself that her talent and determination were enough. As the day of the competition approached, Sophie faced new challenges. The music room at school was crowded with students practicing, and tension simmered beneath every note. Claire's group made snide remarks, sometimes deliberately creating distractions while Sophie rehearsed. Yet every time Sophie drew the bow across her violin, the music cut through the noise, pure and unwavering. Her fingers moved with a precision that belied her age, and each melody carried not just skill but emotion, telling a story that captivated anyone who listened. The night before the competition, Sophie sat in the empty auditorium, violin on her lap. The dim lights cast long shadows across the polished floor. She felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety, knowing that tomorrow could change everything. Her father joined her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "No matter what happens," he said softly, "remember that the music comes from you. Let it speak. Let it shine." Sophie nodded, taking a deep breath. She had practiced, she had persevered, and now it was time to face the world without fear. The morning of the competition arrived, and the venue was filled with students, teachers, and families. Sophie's hands were steady, her mind clear. When her turn came, she stepped onto the stage with wit, confidence. The first few notes filled the hall, and a hush fell over the audience. The judges leaned forward, captivated by the tone and emotion. Every movement of the bow, every delicate shift in rhythm, showcased not just technical skill, but the story of a young girl who had faced prejudice, endured mockery, and refused to give up. By the end of her performance, the auditorium erupted into applause. Judges, teachers, and students alike were stunned. Sophie had not just played, she had commanded the stage, silencing doubters and leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. Claire and her friends sat frozen, their smirks replaced by astonishment. The girl they had mocked, the janitor's daughter with the old violin, had turned the tables completely. As Sophie stepped off the stage, her chest still heaving, she realized that this was more than a victory in a competition. It was a moment of truth. Every insult, every sneer, every whispered doubt had fueled her, not broken her. And while the competition had tested her, it had also revealed something more profound: resilience, courage, and the quiet power of unwavering self-belief. Ending line for part 2, Sophie left the stage with a quiet smile, knowing that she had not only won a contest, but had begun to change the way the world saw her. But the real journey of respect, recognition, and unexpected opportunities was just beginning. Sophie Carter returned to Ashwood High after her stunning performance at the regional competition with a mixture of pride and quiet anticipation. The hallways seemed different now. Where there had been sneers, there were now hesitant nods and cautious smiles. Some students whispered her name with admiration rather than derision. Even teachers who had once overlooked her seemed to regard her with a new respect. But Sophie knew better than to let temporary acknowledgement lull her in. To comfort. Respect, she had learned, was earned, not given, and her journey was far from over. Music class had taken on a new intensity. Miss Harper, who had once questioned Sophie's potential, now assigned her more challenging pieces, offering guidance that was genuine and thoughtful. "Sophie, your progress has been remarkable," she said one morning, handing her a sheet of a particularly difficult composition. "I believe you are ready for something far beyond this classroom." Sophie's hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. Every note she had played in solitude, every melody she had perfected after hours of practice, had led to this moment. But not everyone welcomed her rise. Claire West, still bitter from Sophie's earlier triumphs, began a subtle campaign of sabotage. She enlisted a few classmates to spread rumors, questioning whether Sophie's violin had been secretly tuned by a professional or if her success was merely luck. Sophie overheard fragments of their whispers in the hallways. "There's no way a janitor's daughter could master a piece like that alone." The word stung, but Sophie had grown accustomed to disbelief. She let it slide, focusing instead on refining her performance for the upcoming district finals, knowing that her actions would speak louder than any rumor. Meanwhile, Sophie's father, James, watched with quiet pride. Each evening, after the school emptied and the echoes of footsteps faded, he would join her in the music room. Together, they would repair the old violin, adjust the strings, and practice intricate techniques. James never boasted about her skill, never allowed pride to cloud the lessons of humility and persistence he had instilled in her. Yet in his eyes, Sophie could see a reflection of her own determination mirrored back, a steadfast belief that she was destined for more than the world expected. One day, a letter arrived for Sophie. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar yet elegant, and the seal bore the emblem of a renowned conservatory. Trembling, she opened it to find an invitation. She had been personally selected for a masterclass with one of the world's most celebrated violinists. The message praised her talent and resilience, acknowledging her as a musician of exceptional promise despite her humble beginnings. Sophie's hands shook, not with fear, but with the exhilaration of recognition. Her father embraced her, tears of pride welling in his eyes. "You've always had this inside you, Sophie. Now the world will see it too," he whispered. The masterclass was unlike anything Sophie had experienced. The room was filled with students from prestigious schools, each with perfect instruments, uniforms, and backgrounds steeped in privilege. At first, Sophie felt a pang of insecurity. Could a girl with a patched-up violin really belong here? But as soon as her bow touched the strings, the room transformed. The music that emerged from Sophie's instrument was not only technically flawless, but infused with emotion so deep it silenced the chatter of even the most confident students. Her performance carried her story, the struggles, the pain, the perseverance, and everyone who listened felt it. Among the attendees were influential figures in the music world, including critics, patrons, and educators who had the power to shape her future. Their reactions were immediate. Eyes widened in astonishment, whispers of praise filled the room, and teachers who had underestimated her could only stare in disbelief. It was in that moment that Sophie realized the power of her talent extended beyond her personal victories. Her music could change perceptions, challenge prejudice, and command respect in ways she had only dreamed of. Back at Ashwood High, news of Sophie's achievement began to spread. Teachers who had once treated her as insignificant now approached her with genuine curiosity and, in some cases, remorse. Claire West, who had tried to undermine her at every turn, finally confronted Sophie after school one afternoon. Her voice, once laced with arrogance, faltered as she admitted, I didn't believe you could do this. I thought you'd fail." Sophie met her gaze calmly. She could have responded with anger, with revenge, but instead she simply smiled. "I never needed your belief. I had my own," she said softly, leaving Claire speechless. Sophie's rise was no longer subtle. Invitations for performances, interviews, and scholarships began to arrive. Every recognition reinforced a powerful lesson. Talent and perseverance could outshine prejudice, humility could conquer arrogance, and integrity would always demand respect. The girl who had once walked the halls in fear now carried herself with quiet confidence, proving that the measure of a person was not where they came from, but the dedication and courage they brought to their dreams. Ending line for Part 3. As Sophie prepared for her first major public recital, she understood that her journey was no longer just about music. It was about changing the world's perception, one note at a time, and showing that true brilliance could never be hidden for long. The weeks following Sophie's masterclass were a whirlwind. Invitations poured in from music festivals, competitions, and even local television programs eager to highlight her story. Ashwood High, once indifferent to her existence, had become a stage where her talent could not be ignored. Students who had mocked her now glanced her way with curiosity, some with admiration, and a few with jealousy. Sophie moved through the corridors with quiet confidence, but beneath her calm exterior, she carried the weight of every insult and doubt she had endured. Those memories fueled her determination to rise higher, not just for herself, but for every student who had been underestimated. The school's music teacher, Miss Harper, had become an unexpected ally. She approached Sophie one afternoon with a proposal. "Sophie, there's an international youth orchestra looking for talented soloists. I want to recommend you," she said, her tone sincere. Sophie's eyes widened. This was beyond anything she had imagined, a chance to perform on a global stage, to show the world her skill, and to challenge the biases she had faced at every turn. "I'll do it," Sophie replied, her voice steady despite the storm of excitement within her. But the road ahead was not simple. The application required videos, letters of recommendation, and proof of rigorous training. Many of Sophie's peers assumed she would falter. Claire West, still bitter, whispered to friends, "There's no way she'll make it. Her father's a janitor, and she barely has a proper instrument." These words stung, but Sophie had learned long ago that the opinions of the narrow-minded could not define her. With her father by her side, she meticulously prepared recordings, practiced tirelessly, and polished every performance until it reflected not just skill, but heart. One evening, as Sophie rehearsed a particularly challenging concerto, the old violin began to show signs of wear. A string snapped mid-performance, and for a fleeting moment, panic gripped her. But James Carter, her father, calmly handed her a spare string he had kept tucked away. "Every problem has a solution," he said. You just need patience and focus." Sophie nodded, restrung the violin, and resumed her practice. The music that flowed afterward was richer, stronger, and more expressive than ever before, as if the struggle itself had added depth to her performance. When the selection committee reviewed her application, the judges were astonished. They had expected a talented student from a privileged background, but what they found was something far rarer: raw talent, resilience, and an authenticity that could not be manufactured. Sophie was selected as one of the youngest soloists for the International Youth Orchestra. The announcement sent ripples through Ashwood High. Teachers who had once dismissed her stared in disbelief. Students who had whispered cruelly about her background now watched with envy and awe. Even Claire, who had tried to undermine her, could only gape as Sophie's name appeared in bold on the announcement board. The day of the first international rehearsal arrived, and Sophie stepped into a grand concert hall for the first time. The space was filled with young musicians from around the world, each carrying instruments that gleamed in the spotlight. At first, Sophie felt the familiar pang of insecurity. Could the girl with the patched-up violin truly belong here? But as she lifted her bow and drew the first note, the hall transformed. Every sound that emerged was precise, expressive, and emotionally charged. Fellow musicians paused, captivated by the depth of feeling in her performance. The music told a story of struggle, perseverance, and triumph, a narrative that transcended words and background. Back home, Ashwood High teachers could no longer ignore Sophie's accomplishments. Meetings were held, and whispers of regret spread among those who had underestimated her. Miss Harper approached Sophie one day, her voice tinged with emotion. "I can't tell you how proud I am," she said softly. "I was wrong to doubt you, and I see now that your talent and your heart are extraordinary." Sophie smiled, but there was no need for words to express the lessons already learned. Respect, she understood, could only be truly earned through action, not empty apologies. Meanwhile, Sophie's success inspired other students, particularly those who had felt marginalized or underestimated. She became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that one's circumstances do not define one's potential. Her performances were more than music. They were statements, declarations of hope and courage. Even parents and students who had once doubted her now approached with admiration, eager to witness the girl who had overcome prejudice with talent, determination, and humility. As Sophie prepared for her first international performance, a surprise awaited her. A scholarship committee invited James Carter to attend the opening night, recognizing the sacrifices he had made to support his daughter. Sitting in the front row, James watched Sophie take the stage with pride swelling in his chest. The music flowed from her like a river of emotion, commanding attention, earning respect, and silencing every lingering whisper of doubt. That night, Sophie was no longer just a student at Ashwood High. She was a prodigy, a symbol of resilience and a reminder that true talent and perseverance cannot be ignored. Ending line for Part 4. As the final note rang out and the audience erupted into applause, Sophie realized that every moment of struggle, every whispered insult, and every doubt cast upon her had led to this revelation. She was unstoppable, and the world had finally begun to understand it. The International Music Festival had arrived, and Sophie Carter stood backstage in a grand hall that seemed almost too immense to contain her dreams. The lights reflected off the polished wooden floor, and the audience's murmurs echoed against the walls. She held her worn violin in her hands, but tonight it carried not just strings and wood, it carried years of struggle, ridicule, and quiet determination. Every note she had practiced in the empty hallways of Ashwood High, every whispered insult, every doubt had led to this moment. This was more than a performance, it was her statement to the world. As she walked onto the stage, a hush fell over the audience. Parents, teachers, fellow musicians, and critics from across the globe turned their eyes to her. The first few seconds were tense. Could a girl with a patched-up violin truly command the attention of a room filled with seasoned musicians and discerning critics? Then Sophie drew the bow across the strings. The sound was electric, pure, rich, and filled with emotion. The music swept through the hall, each note telling the story of a young girl underestimated by the world, yet undeterred in her pursuit of excellence. Back at Ashwood High, news of Sophie's festival performance had reached every corner. Teachers who had once treated her as insignificant gathered in the staff room, some with curiosity, others with regret. Claire West and her clique, once so smug, followed live streams on their phones, their expressions shifting from amusement to shock as Sophie's performance unfolded in real time. The girl they had mocked, the daughter of a janitor, was not just participating. She was mesmerizing the audience, leaving seasoned professionals in awe. Sophie's music flowed seamlessly, each movement of the bow more confident than the last. Judges leaned forward, captivated. Critics scribbled notes, murmuring praise to one another. Every crescendo, every delicate passage carried Sophie's personal journey, her resilience, her quiet courage, and the countless hours she had devoted to mastering her craft. The audience, initially polite, became spellbound, completely absorbed in the narrative woven through her strings. Even the most skeptical observers could not deny the brilliance before them. Midway through her performance, Sophie noticed a subtle shift in the room. Teachers from Ashwood who had once doubted her were sitting upright, eyes wide with astonishment. Miss Harper's face, once reserved, now shone with pride and awe. Claire West's jaw tightened as she watched Sophie transform every note into a declaration of talent, confidence, and undeniable worth. It was a silent lesson. Prejudice and mockery could never suppress true ability. The final piece in Sophie's repertoire was her most challenging yet, a composition demanding both technical mastery and deep emotional resonance. She had practiced it countless times in the music room after school, imagining every note reaching the hearts of her listeners. As her bow danced across the strings, the music soared, filling the auditorium with a story of struggle, perseverance, and ultimate triumph. Every whisper of doubt, every mocking glance from the past was swept away by the power of her performance. By the time she played the last note, the hall was silent for a heartbeat, suspended in awe before erupting into thunderous applause. Backstage, Sophie allowed herself a brief moment of relief. The emotion she had bottled up for years poured out in tears of joy and triumph. James Carter hugged his daughter tightly, whispering words of pride and love. "You did it, Sophie. You've shown them all who you really are," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Sophie smiled through her tears, feeling the weight of every struggle she had endured lift from her shoulders. The award ceremony followed, and when Sophie's name was called for first place, the applause was deafening. Cameras flashed, judges congratulated her personally, and her fellow musicians approached with admiration rather than competition. Sophie had not only won the festival, she had shattered expectations, rewritten perceptions, and earned a respect that no ridicule could diminish. When Ashwood High learned of Sophie's victory, the reaction was mixed. Some students whispered apologies, others stared in awe, and the teachers who had underestimated her faced the quiet sting of regret. Claire West, who had once mocked Sophie openly, now approached her hesitantly. I never believed you could do this," she admitted, her voice small. Sophie looked at her calmly. "It wasn't about your belief," she replied softly. "It was about mine." The festival victory was only the beginning. Sophie's talent opened doors to scholarships, mentorships, and international opportunities. She became a symbol for every student who had been underestimated, a testament to the power of perseverance, humility, and resilience. Her story spread far beyond the music world, inspiring others to believe in themselves, even when the world doubts them. Ending line for Part 5. As Sophie walked off the stage that night, medal in hand and applause ringing in her ears, she knew that the respect she had earned was more than personal triumph. It was proof that true talent and unwavering determination could never be denied. The months following Sophie Carter's International Music Festival victory were transformative, not just for her, but for everyone around her. Ashwood High, once a place of whispered ridicule and covert prejudice, now hummed with a new energy whenever Sophie walked its halls. Students who had once mocked her paused, unsure how to approach the girl they had underestimated. Teachers who had dismissed her quietly corrected their attitudes, realizing that talent and character cannot be measured by appearance, family background, or social status. Sophie's daily life had changed, but she remained grounded. Each morning she helped her father tidy classrooms and hallways, the routine a reminder of where she came from and the values she carried. Her violin, now fully restored with a professional setup, rested carefully in her case, but it still bore the marks of the patched-up strings, a symbol of her journey and perseverance. Every note she played carried her story, resonating with audiences far beyond Ashwood High. Yet for all the accolades and recognition, Sophie's focus remained on the music, on growth, and on staying true to herself. Word of Sophie's accomplishments spread quickly. Invitations to perform at prestigious concerts and masterclasses poured in, each opportunity validating years of unseen effort and quiet determination. Ashwood High's administration, embarrassed by their previous underestimation of her, approached her with offers to mentor younger students, giving her a platform to inspire others. Sophie accepted, knowing that her influence could extend beyond applause and medals. It could change perceptions, encourage resilience, and cultivate humility in those who had once scorned her. Claire West, who had been the loudest skeptic and mocker, found herself confronting the consequences of her own behavior. She approached Sophie one afternoon, nervous and uncertain. I didn't think you could do any of this," Claire admitted, her voice trembling. Sophie studied her quietly, understanding that her success could teach more than anger or revenge ever could. "It's not about what anyone else thinks," Sophie replied gently. "It's about believing in yourself and doing your best. That's what matters." Claire nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson that Sophie had lived every day. Humility, perseverance, and integrity matter more than mocking others or holding on to prejudice. Sophie's performances now captivated audiences across cities and countries. Every stage she stepped onto carried her story, the story of the janitor's daughter who had been underestimated, laughed at, and dismissed, yet had risen through talent, resilience, and unyielding determination. Each note was a message to the world. Do not judge by appearances, do not underestimate potential, and never assume that a person's background dictates their ability. Her music spoke louder than words, leaving listeners moved, inspired, and often humbled. The teachers who had once suggested she play the violin as a joke faced a quiet reckoning. Miss Harper, who had initially doubted Sophie, approached her one day after class. "Sophie, I want to apologize for not seeing your talent sooner," she said, her voice sincere. Sophie smiled, feeling no need for lingering bitterness. "You can't change the past," she replied. "All we can do is learn from it, and I've learned a lot. About patience, about resilience, and about believing in yourself." Miss Harper nodded, clearly moved by the young girl's wisdom beyond her years. Sophie also found ways to support other students who had faced prejudice or doubt. She volunteered her time to mentor younger musicians, offering guidance and encouragement to those who might have been overlooked. In doing so, she turned her personal triumph into a legacy of empowerment, showing that success is most meaningful when shared and used to uplift others. Parents, teachers, and students alike came to understand that true talent, perseverance, and humility create ripples far beyond personal achievement. The most powerful moment of Sophie's journey came during a school assembly months later. Ashwood High had invited her to perform for the student body and faculty. As Sophie stood on the stage, violin in hand, the audience was filled with anticipation. She began to play and the hall fell silent, completely captivated. Every note resonated with the struggles she had faced, the mockery she had endured, and the perseverance that had carried her through. By the time she finished, there were no whispers of doubt, no sneers, no judgment, only admiration and respect. Parents and students approached Sophie afterward, expressing how her story had inspired them. Teachers admitted their mistakes and praised her determination. Even Claire West, now humbled, stood quietly watching the girl she had once ridiculed command the stage and hearts alike. Sophie had done more than prove her talent. She had shown the world the power of resilience, humility, and unwavering self-belief. As Sophie packed her violin after the performance, her father joined her, pride shining in his eyes. "You've done more than play music, Sophie," he said softly. "You've changed the way people see the world, and that is something no one can ever take from you." Sophie smiled, feeling the weight of her journey settle into something warm and lasting. She had faced prejudice, endured ridicule, and overcome every obstacle with grace and determination. And now the respect she had earned was not fleeting. It was deserved, undeniable, and transformative. Ending line for Part 6. Sophie walked out of the auditorium that day, her heart full, knowing that he had not only claimed her dreams but had also shown the world a simple truth. Respect is earned through talent, perseverance, and kindness, and those who underestimate others often learn the hardest lesson too late.